What happened to your dog?
Died. Was that true? Well, actually, I had 2 dogs. The other one is alive, but he's not living with me now. He's still living with my parents in Venezuela.
I've got 3 stray dogs that like showed up on my farm one day. That's all I have. If anybody wants them, they can come take them too. So let's start with some questions.
Don't be shy.
Nick, you go on that. Well, I was curious about the 3.0 new ORM scheme. I think those examples in the presentation. It's more like just kind of running almost SQL statements. So if there's any more model associations, like where that went. Say it again.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question was more about the new 3.0 object oriented, the ORM. It looked like from your slides, it looked like more. It's like SQL statements with arrows, kind of type of thing. And I was wondering more about how you associate models and how that goes into play going forward.
Yeah, I only had 30 minutes to show a lot of things, so I just highlighted what if I thought it was interesting. Associations are still there, as probably you saw in one of my examples. Associations are also declared in an array, or you can declare them using procedural code. Table belongs to, table has many, something else. And when you find, is kind of awesome. Contain is built in, so there's a contain function that is already there. But I'm not sure if you have also used linkable before, the linkable plugin. It's kind of a mix between linkable and containable. So you can contain as usual, as in Cake 2. It will bring your associations. That's basically eager loading. But also you can filter by association. One thing that is not possible with containable is, for example, article contain tag conditions tag.name equals CakePHP. That will bring actually the tags with the name CakePHP, but will not filter the articles, right? But in Cake 3 you can say contain tag filter true. So this is still there. It looks like SQL because I'm actually modeling a SQL layer. But the array interface is still there. So you can actually call table, find, and you pass an array, conditions, fields, group, whatever you used to do in Cake 2 is still there. I prefer the chainable. So far, it does not return objects. I'm still working on a lot of stuff in the find layer. It will return objects at some point, and when it does, then you will be able to lazy load associations. So it returns an article, and then when you try to access comments, when you iterate for the first time, it will do the query for you. If you like, if you want to eager load, then you can call contain first.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I've been following the 3.0 commits for a while, and I was curious to know what the core team had in place for helping the community kind of migrate from how things are done with the 5.2 and 5.3 versions of PHP and all the PHP 4 goodies that are in 3.0. I know that the 3.0 probably released before the next Cake Fest. So I was curious to know if you guys have any plans on just helping the community make that migration from those different versions of PHP and, of course, of Cake.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we've done pretty well in the past has been to give some sort of shell that allows people to automatically migrate what they can migrate. Obviously, it's not always possible to do a lot of that. So as we've been changing the core, a lot of the really backwards incompatible changes have been documented in a migration guide. So when we say the model layer is changing in this way and that might affect BC, we go ahead and say here's a line that you have to change if we can't automatically change it. So part of it is providing the same sort of tooling that we've provided in the past that will automatically change as much as possible, but also providing the documentation for the things that we can't. And so that'll generally be the same case with migration from 2.5 to, or 2.4 to 3.x or whatever the next 2.x release will be. Does that answer your question? Come on, guys. Don't be shy. I don't bite much. Not unless paid.
So, so I have a less technical question, but so as CakePHP developers, what can we do to help promote the community and grow things with the with the core team's help, or in helping the CakePHP community itself grow and get new developers on board and help evangelize that?
Okay, so there are lots of paths you can take right now. So the biggest, probably the most evident path is GitHub. So either contributing a patch, and that can be in two ways. Maybe you're working with a framework and you find something, you fix it and you contribute it back. Or we have Lighthouse app, where you can go and see tickets that people have logged. They don't necessarily have the abilities all the time to fix what they found, but they've documented and they said, well, this is the issue, this is what happens, this is the outcome, but it should really be this. So if you're really into it, you can check out tickets and see if there's something you can pick up and say, I can fix that in 5 minutes. So that's probably the most evident way you can get involved, and that's the most direct way. The indirect way is probably through community channels. So once again, on GitHub, you can get involved in discussion. So sometimes you just have a point of view on something, or you can add to the discussion that's happening around something, and that can be a new feature or a fix. And maybe you have something that's pertinent to what's happening, and it's going to be worthwhile you just dropping a comment saying, this, or RFC 123 says this, but you're doing something wrong here. That's another way if you've got knowledge and you can contribute that way. The other way is like what we're doing here. So going out and mobilizing the community. And that can be in many ways. You can set up hackathons, you can set up small meetup groups, like yourself. Or you can go far out. CRAM on the core actually runs the Netherlands group. And there you have a get-together, and that's been consistently growing over, I think, like the past 3 or 4 months that they've been running it. And it's been, really, really good. So there are a lot of ways. The best thing to do is to go to what I showed in my keynote, community.cakephp.org. Top menu, there's a get involved. Basically, you run through that, and that is everything you can do. The other thing I mentioned in the keynote was documentation. Sometimes you may not be that good with code, or you just don't have the time to contribute with code because you basically have to test. You need to find the edge cases. But maybe you can contribute documentation with examples or anything like that.
Sorry, as a follow-up, if we're working on projects, obviously on the Cake site, there's, I don't know if you guys can hear me through this, but there's there's sections of you guys promoting other people that are working on Cake projects. It's obviously big to, somebody goes to the Cake site, they want to see that big projects are being done in it. If we're working on projects, how do we submit those to you guys or get listed on the site to show off the way that Cake's being used on all these different systems throughout the world? Okay, well, we've got most of the contact information is on the CakePHP site itself, but anyone here can email me. I don't know if I'm going to regret this, but it's james.watts@cakephp.org. And if you can send through a link, the only thing we need to be able to display someone on the front-end site is their consent. And we were talking about this, between us. Huh? And screenshots, yeah, and cool logos, and make sure it's an important name. We need their consent, because one of the problems we have is there are actually a lot of people out there using CakePHP, and they're really significant companies. But then, they're not that upfront about saying, all our backend is built with X technology, because basically it's exposing a security risk. So if you can get someone's consent, that's awesome. Oh, yeah, of course. All the channels. So you got the CakePHP IRC channel. We got the CakePHP Google group. We got the Facebook group. We got the LinkedIn group. We got the Google Plus community. We're like we're a virus. We're just everywhere.
In the Google groups, we have the CakePHP, that is for questions in general, but we also have one CakePHP-core that is just for new things or improvements in the core. It's not about I found a bug. It's about I have this idea, a new feature for Cake, and we can introduce in the new version. This is my idea. You guys think it's nice? Before like you implement everything, do a pull request, and then the core decide, oh, this probably is not the best place to put in the framework. You know?
It's not a support channel. Yeah. That is not a support channel. The community channel is the CakePHP Google group. So you get banned if you come onto the core channel and start asking us how to do something in the framework.
I'm banned from the CakePHP core group because I made that mistake. So don't make that mistake. I think Mark Story actually banned me.
How did you get here in the first place? Today, I mean.
Plane, I think.
Actually, this is much more of a out of curiosity, but one of the things that I do when I talk to people about Cake, I always tell them the other frameworks that I've worked with. I'm curious to know, what other frameworks have you guys dabbled in, either currently or prior to working with CakePHP?
At work, I use Symfony PHP, version 1.1 with an ass ton of patches. Sucks. We use Flask for Python and Tornado. Used Rails, so a bunch of random stuff.
Yeah, my experience is mostly from Rails as well. I used to be a Rails developer before I really got into the Cake stuff. I also used Django. I mean, I guess frameworks grow out of curiosity about both what you have as conceptual idea, but also what other people do. So I think I speak for the entire team when we spend a lot of time looking at what other people do and see how that can fit into what Cake is and what Cake is supposed to be. I mean, I think we have inspiration for basically all frameworks, and all frameworks have inspiration from Cake. So it's like this big happy pot of inspiration for everyone. So yeah, everyone borrows from each other. It's really hard to be unique today with thousands of PHP frameworks out there. I guess it's more about how you build the community and how you actually keep moving it forward.
Me just Zend and Symfony, and I'm CakePHP core, so that should give you an idea.
Yeah, mainly Symfony, but yeah, as I am also pretty convinced that Cake is in that point, like more rapid development and more what I stand for, what I think it should be. Yeah.
I've used Zend and Symfony. Quite a lot of Symfony, and I also do quite a bit of, did in the past, quite a lot of Node development. I guess that qualifies kind of. I said I did. Oh. Your ears need cleaning.
I'm curious to know what Larry
CakePHP, I haven't used any of the other frameworks, to be honest. When we started the project, prior to that, I'd worked on, I worked with PHP back when it first came out, what was like PHP Fi, like PHP/FI. And then I worked on the Exchange project, doing a lot of open source development with them. That was like in the late 90s, whenever that came out. And then from Post-Nuke, I went from Post-Nuke, being a core contributor on that, ran into a situation where I was not doing anything for a few months, and started working on something similar to what we have in our models now in CakePHP, and that's when Michael and I teamed up shortly after that to do CakePHP, and really never took the opportunity to look at anything else, because starting out with a framework and doing it, it's as Christian had mentioned, we have our own ideas on how something had to be done, and I used to tell others on the core that I didn't want to be influenced by something somebody else was doing, because we had a certain idea. We kind of laid out a roadmap internally. We wanted to stick to that, and if you start looking at what other people were doing with their frameworks initially, when you're starting, you're going to sit and you're going to just bike shed the entire thing. You're going to sit there and discuss for hours, months on if you should implement something. Instead, just jump right in, run with it, and then when the framework got popular, start bringing on more core contributors, we started looking at other ideas and ways of implementing things. So, PHP and CakePHP. That's all I've done. That's why my name's PHP Nut.
Go ball. Yeah, troll ball. I. What do you mean? Yeah. Well, basically, I've looked into everything. Not that I have used everything for real applications, but I have tried every other major framework in PHP and also Rails, Django, frameworks done in Haskell. I've tried everything. From those, I do borrow ideas. Currently, I'm heavily influenced by functional programming, so you will find a lot of that in the model layer right now. There's a lot of people that have trouble understanding how functional programming works, so I have had to roll back some of my original implementations into something more procedural. I guess your question is more like, why did you choose Cake or to be in Cake instead of Symfony or whatever else? I would say that Cake is rad. It's like I can do an application in a very short time. It's very easy to remember where you put stuff, for example. Like you can see a project after a couple years, 3 years, or even 4 years, and you know exactly if you find a bug, in what class you put the code, and probably in what method. So that apparent constraint you have, that those handlebars you have to drive you to your final goal, I think that's a good thing. And that's the thing that junior developers or beginners in frameworks fight the most, because they think they're stealing any freedom out of them. But when you stick to conventions, when you stick to those handlebars, there's actually great power in them.
I started with PHP, raw PHP, with no frameworks. And then a couple of years ago, I started to look some frameworks. And at that point, it was like CakePHP, Coordinator, and like some one or two. And I decided to go more deep with CakePHP. And after came like Zen and other frameworks. And I look at them, but they're not so complete like CakePHP is, and extendable as well. So some frameworks, they give you a lot of features, but if you want to extend, make some custom thing for you, it's kind of hard. And also, it's like you cannot change the default behavior sometimes. So this is why I choose CakePHP and stay with them. My current company is still using CakePHP.
I'm curious for your personal workflows, if there's a part that you're passionate about, whether it's, oh, I love this editor because it helps my workflow this way, or moving something from development to production. I'm just curious if any of you are passionate about the way that you do things, and if there are things that we can become more efficient at by following those.
So what I'm passionate about is to not repeat myself ever and be as lazy as possible. CRUD is one thing, but I also have developed quite a few deployment systems. One of them is getting to a point now that it's pretty close to being open sourced. It's probably gonna be on Friends of Cake on GitHub at some point. It basically allows you to deploy your applications to any servers using FTP, SSH, SFTP. It manages migrations, it manages cron jobs, it manages everything for you, and it's really, really easy to set up. Flow-wise, always use Git flow for everything. Yeah, that's basically, I guess, is that what you were after? What
Sure.
kind of, yeah.
Well, I usually don't sit well with people because I'm anti-IDE. So for me, I'm in Shell and Vim, and anything else just doesn't work. So if you use Shell and Vim, you're a man. And as far as workflow, my lemma's always been scripted. If you're doing something, always think about automating it. Because if you're going to do something, it's really likely you're going to do it again. So the first time you do it, scripted. And that first script may not be good, it may not be efficient, but it will improve. Because next time around, you need to extend it, you need to do something different, or you need to add features to it. And if you think about someone else doing your stuff, and, in this case, the computer doing your stuff, you're going to get to the point where you yourself will just scale. You'll scale to the workload that you can take on. And that stuff always comes back. Because I've written tons of stuff, and 4 years later, you pick up a script and say, oh, that was really useful, and you start using it again. And when you start using it, and you've picked up in those 4 years loads of really cool stuff, and you can just put it in there and say, oh, well, I can do this differently, or I can do this better. So definitely, if you're going to go away with anything from me, it would be scripted.
I can only second the part Yippee and James Watt said about dry, so don't repeat yourself. If you happen to do something like more than once, in Cake usually you have lots of ways to put that into functionality into a dry either component, task, view helper, behavior whatsoever. Yeah, and that's one way I'm passionate about, like to make it reusable and yeah, to use it in a clean way.
I'll add something. Yeah. So I'm also a Vim user, and I like to script things. I have a similar philosophy to James, I guess. I do something once. If I do it twice, I think about how to automate it. And if I do something 3 times, I definitely do so. And one of those things, for example, is I make a lot of mistakes because I'm just human and typically tired. So I use Git hooks often to automate things. So for example, to avoid having PHP CS errors, code standard errors, I automate them so that when I'm committing, I run the check on the file. So it doesn't let me commit without correcting my very obvious white space errors that I leave if I don't run my my checks.
So they've been talking about scripting and like sort of automating the things that you do. One of the things that I recently have dived into is this tool called Sub. It's by 37 Signals. It's actually on GitHub, SUB. And so what it does is it gives you a scaffold for building scripts. So what you would do is at work we have this thing called SG. So we do SG and then deploy, and then the thing that we're deploying. And what Sub allows us to do is sort of scaffold out those methods and have them available as command line utilities. So we might not just have deploy tools, but also things for the operations people or for non-technical people where they can say, oh, how much revenue are we making in the past month, past year, past 3.5 weeks, that sort of thing. So definitely like having that available as a shell or a command line utility, and having that available to not just yourself, but for everyone in your company, because there are people outside of the technical process that can say, oh, this is inefficient. Is there a way I can automate this? That's very important.
James is actually going to be giving a talk tomorrow on the workflow that we use at CakeDC, so I don't want to go into a lot of detail on that, but that's something that after his talk we're probably going to publish that as a white paper and let people start, if they want to use our workflow that we use at our company, they're more than welcome to do it.
I think you have said what I would say. I'm not much a scripting person. I do it, but I usually don't think about it too much. On the other side, my recommendation in workflow would be think about it. We tend to just jump into code and go whatever the road takes us. But I do take a lot of time to think about what I'm going to do. Some other core developers, I see it works for them to think about it, but like in a concrete way. They write some sort of documentation or write some sort of diagram or something that gets projected somewhere. I'm not much of a projection guy, but I like thinking a lot, so I take a lot of time thinking. I usually dream about code, and then when I wake up, it's like, yes, I know. That would be my recommendation. Instead of just jumping and do whatever crazy thing is on your mind, try to think about all the possibilities and what would be the best thing. document yourself and what is around, and you might get in some inspiration. On the IDE side, I don't use one. I use MacVim. As any programmer, I'm a very, very lazy guy. So instead of doing my own scripts and finding my own plugins, I know a great guy that already did that job for me. So I just grab his files. That's Mark's story. And he always updates with new plugins. I just need to git pull his thing. And I just learn, just see the git diff and say, oh, that's nice. Thanks, Mark. That's it.
For us, like all the deployment stuff is kind of separate team in my company. So usually they do Chef and with Jenkins and stuff. So we were more about the CakePHP app itself and the repo, how we put, what do we put in feature flags or some like merge branches or not. So like our workflow is more a little agile. So most of like bugs and stuff we push directly to the develop branch, and more features we do some branches, and everything else like to push the code itself is handled by a different team.
I think we've got time for one more question. Yeah. Come on, guys. Back to the frameworks question. From a business perspective and community perspective, I see Laravel growing. I think I talked to Larry about this a little bit. Growing very fast. So I'm just wondering if anybody on the team has been following them and seeing what they're doing right. I know, I mean, sometimes you want to just focus on what you're doing, but at the same time, for the framework to thrive, we still got to, I think, sometimes look at what other people are doing right. Just wondering what everybody thinks about Laravel and if they've looked at it and if it's on the core team's mind at all.
I have spent a lot of time reading Laravel. It's a very good framework. It's basically CakePHP. Sorry. CakePHP 3, I would say. That they have a lot of things that it reminds me of Cake 3, because I think we're all heading the same direction, and there is not much of what the language allows us to do. Either you go the full Java way in a very programming by contract, that would be Symfony, or you go the Rails way, which is use as much convention over configuration as possible. That would be Laravel. I think that right now Laravel is the framework where all other frameworks come to die. CodeIgniter is basically dead now. Nobody wants to take care of it. So all the CodeIgniter guys went to Laravel. Fuel, I wouldn't say it's dead. There's at least one active developer doing it, but not much people is using it. It got a lot of traction from people from CodeIgniter, but it's slowing down. So that's a framework that will just die on Laravel too. And there are a couple frameworks more. It's quite popular here in the US, but not in the rest of the world. I have actually seen the trends in Google Trends. It's quite active in America, but it's basically unknown anywhere else. Actually, if you want to see a nice stat about Laravel, if you go to GitHub, create new repo, and then choose a git ignore file, you will find CakePHP, but you will not find Laravel there as a suggestion. So it's something that is gaining traction, but to at what point? If you see the curve or the slope of the growth of CakePHP when it started, it gained a lot of traction, but then the slope declines. So it's very infant in its age, so I guess the slope will be very, very steep, but at some point it's going to slow down. I still recommend you guys to check it out. It has some very cool ideas. It's quite similar to Cake. I think it's a natural choice for if you want to experiment with something else. I still think that Cake is cooler though. I mean, Cake Core, it's better. I think it has a more mature approach to some things. There are some weird decisions that have been made in that framework that I wouldn't share. I wouldn't enjoy coding on top of them. But yeah. Anyone else?
So I actually work with someone who used to be on the CodeIgniter core, and I think he contributed to Fuel a little bit. And I mean, we've discussed our respective frameworks, and we've actually thought about having a framework showdown. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter as long as the framework that you're using is one that you're extremely comfortable with. I think I could kick his ass while writing an app in Cake, but he probably thinks the same about his frameworks. That said, we both agreed that a lot of the people who are going to Laravel and a lot of these newer frameworks are actually the people who are leaving stuff like CodeIgniter and Kohana. And I think that part of that is because a lot of the people who use those frameworks are sort of chasing the latest and greatest. So at some point they get to Laravel or whatever the next framework is and say, oh, there's Node.js version 0.18 or something, right? And then they start using it then because it's the latest and greatest, not necessarily because it solves the problem that they have. So the people who are using Laravel, if it solves their problem, awesome. And I think a lot of the community stuff that they're doing is very good. But at the end of the day, it's more about whether or not the framework you're using or the tools you're using, the stack that you're on, is something that actually solves the problem and makes you money. So
I think another thing as well is probably more internal to CakePHP is the guys on Twitter that tweet, oh my god, CakePHP sucks, Laravel rules. When you chat them up, it's like, okay, so what sucks about Cake? It's like, oh, you cannot do this and this and this. It's like, yeah, you kind of can't do that. And it's kind of easier, and here's a documentation. And it's like, oh, I didn't know that. So I guess for us as CakePHP, it's also a matter of marketing to the developers to actually be able to easily find how awesome Cake is. Because it seems like a lot of people are missing all the awesome features of CakePHP and then go to another framework that's new and gets tons of hype. And it's like, oh, they have that, while CakePHP also have it, and probably perhaps have a better implementation of it. But because they wasn't able to find it easily in CakePHP, they just go to another framework. It's like, okay, Cake sucked. It's too bad. I think that's at least something that James is doing really well, trying to push out some marketing about CakePHP. And I think the documentation also going forward will probably improve a lot in that way.
Our documentation does not suck anymore. So I mean that was the biggest problem when CakePHP, when we first started developing it, is there was like zero documentation. I'll take blame for that, and as some of the the earlier people in the project, because we weren't so much about documenting what it was that we were doing. We wanted to get it to a point where we felt comfortable, knew what it would do, and then go back and document it. You can't run a project like that, and that was probably one of our biggest downfalls at the beginning, was not having good documentation. Now the documentation is some of the best documentation, I believe, for any of the frameworks out there. And it's just getting rid of that stigma, that bad reputation we had for having the worst documentation of any PHP project out there. I don't think it was the worst, but that's the reputation that we had. And a lot of people would not come back to the project because of the way the documentation originally was.
I just wanted to add something else. I think one of the reasons Laravel got so popular, along with other frameworks, is that it allows this Node.js kind of syntax where you have a router and you can connect whatever template to a closure. What for? So you want all your application in one file? Go ahead. Yeah, try to maintain that in a couple years. That's it. Is it the last question? Thank you, guys.